In today's episode, my guest was Nick Mason. He's the founder and CEO of a company called Turtl. It's a B2B SaaS business in the content marketing space, and they built quite an innovative solution. They've been in the business since 2015. They recently raised £10 million to keep building and growing the business. And I think it's an interesting episode, especially for everyone who's building a B2B SaaS product or anyone who's interested in doing that, because we talk about all the different steps that Nick had to take from the very beginning, how he came up with the idea, how they build the MVP, how they raise funding, and so on and so forth. And we talk a little bit about the psychology of marketing as well, and a number of other topics. So I hope you're going to enjoy it. And if you do, please leave a review on Spotify, on Apple Podcasts, or just leave a comment and like on YouTube. Thanks. Enjoy the episode. Nick, welcome to the Founders Lounge.
Nice to be here. Thanks, Matthias.
Absolutely. Glad to have you on. So let's start with just a quick introduction. Nick, who are you? What do you do?
Yeah, that's a very interesting philosophical question. I don't know. I suppose for the purposes of this context, I'm Nick Mason. I'm the founder and CEO of a business called Turtl, and we exist to help solve the problem of attention in digital content. So there's loads of content out there. We each see about 5,000 different marketing messages every single day. And if you're a company trying to get through to someone on the other side, how are you going to compete against all of that noise? And so we help companies solve that problem and get more attention in the context of digital documents. So you think about case studies, white papers, reports, all these kinds of things. Businesses produce loads of them, but research shows that a lot of them go unread. And so we use psychology and analytics and personalization, all kinds of interesting things, to get up to 10 times more read time and engagement on those critical digital documents that businesses spend so much time and money putting out into the market. And then, as I say, the default position is they don't actually get read that much. That's what we're here to fix.
That's actually a really cool way to put it. So when you said, I haven't heard that before, you said you're solving the problem of attention in content marketing. And we all know that attention span is just terrible right now, right? It's just getting worse and worse in the day and age of TikToks and I suppose just social media in general, right? So you immediately got my attention when you put it that way, when you said, well, we solved the problem of attention in content marketing. I'm like, oh, okay, that is a problem that we have.
It's a real problem because, like, when you look at it and when you think about it, attention is the key to everything. Like, for people listening to this podcast, if we don't have their attention, we could be talking about anything. We could just be rambling on about nothing. So without that attention, businesses can't sell to people because they're not paying attention to your offer. They're not paying attention to what you're saying and the value you provide. You can't hire people because if you don't have attention in a recruiting context, like, why would I come and work for you? You can't serve customers because if you don't have a customer's attention, you can't have a dialogue, and you can't. So everything that businesses and actually human beings need to do is fundamentally predicated on being able to get someone's attention. And so it's a really big problem. And what businesses do is they tend to overlook it in their efforts to get particular outcomes. But the way that we see the world is like, you want more leads, you want to sell more stuff, you want to hire more of the right people. You first need to start by getting the attention of the people who you want to take those actions in the context of your business. And our view is there's just not enough focus on that attention piece. So that's what we're here for.
Cool. And I think we'll touch on that a little bit more later on. So I think I know roughly what your product is, but I think it will be helpful for everyone to understand a little bit better. If you describe a bit what your product is and who are your customers, how it's being used. And then from there, let's go a little bit about how you build the business and what you guys are working on now and so on.
Sure. So the simplest way to explain it is if you think about case studies, white papers, thought leadership, those kinds of things that B2Bs typically put out into the market and spend, in some cases, hundreds of thousands of dollars putting these things together, you instantly think PDF or long scrolling web page. And where the business started is with some insights from the world of psychology. So there's a huge amount of psychological research into how the brain responds to the written word on the page. And there's all kinds of interesting ideas around layout and around chunking and around dual coding using images and text together and how that creates a better impression. The idea that you need to be getting people to make micro decisions as they go through an experience. And that's interesting. You mentioned TikTok, and fundamentally that's about making micro decisions about what you're going to watch. This psychology is really interesting. And that was actually the genesis for the business, is the application of good psychology to the problem of attention in digital documents. And so what we designed is a digital document format which embodies we crammed as much as we can into that format of that good psychology. And like the key result from that is we've done A/B tests with content in other formats versus our format. And just by changing the format, we've seen a 10 times increase in average read time. So that was the biggest increase that we saw, where the original was being read on average for 16 seconds. Our version was read for 2 minutes and 57 seconds. Exactly the same content, just the application of psychology. And this comes back to kind of the idea of the medium and the message. You know, when you say something, half of it is what you're saying, the other half is how you're saying it. So at our core, we're that document format. But because that document format is online, we can also measure it and show you exactly where everyone is, what they did, what they looked at, so you can pick up the phone and have the right conversation or pass the right people over to marketing. No more just saying, hey, 5,000 people downloaded the white paper, have at it. You know, no sales guy wants that. That's not helpful. And also we can do all kinds of amazing things around automation. So, you know, if you've got documents that you want to tweak and change based on who's going to see it, or you want to allow people to select different sections before they start reading, or you want to do outbound stuff where every document is different based on the recipient's sector or their interest areas or some other piece of data, you know, we can support that. So really what we're trying to do is just take those static, traditional, long form but important pieces of content and drag them kind of kicking and screaming into 2022 or 2023, as it will be in a few months. So that's our platform in a nutshell.
All right, before we continue, I want to take a second to talk about our sponsor. I've always been saying that one of the best ways to learn about business is by working closely with a smart and successful entrepreneur, and this might be your opportunity. Our sponsor is a company called Judge Me. Judge Me is a Shopify product review plugin, and they're the number one plugin on Shopify. They're literally, if you look at the Shopify App Store, they're in the first spot. They're bootstrapped, and they managed to outcompete other companies that raised hundreds of millions of dollars by just being smarter and building a better product. They were started by PJ, who was also a guest on the Founders Lounge, episode 54, so I recommend you to check it out. They recently moved their headquarters to London, and they're looking for smart people to join them. They're looking for product managers, engineers, and they're looking to fill other roles as well. So check out careers.judge.me and see if you find any role that you like and apply. So that's careers.judge.me. Now enjoy the rest of the episode. Can you talk a little bit about the very early days? What was the very first version, the first MVP? How did you build that? Because I think it's interesting for a few reasons. First of all, I think what you're building it's quite an innovative way of presenting content, right? And you build it on top of, really it sounds like you build it on top of all sorts of psychological insights. And I'm just curious how that happened in your, a lot of people are struggling, a lot of people come to me and they're like, I don't know, I don't really have any good business ideas. I don't know how to, I don't know what to work on. And then maybe they take something that already exists and they just kind of tweak that. And that's fine as well. I think that's a perfectly good way to build a business and to start something. But I'm curious how this came to be in the very early days.
So, the story of how we got started is I was doing some work with a colleague at Medical Sciences at Oxford University, and we were actually building for them a data sharing service kind of thing. So my background is in product design, so that's what I was doing, and really just by chance got talking to some researchers, because obviously you've got to engage with the end customer to design the right solution, and the end customer is the researcher in that project. And so there's a joke that I always say, but it's true, which is that in academia, the more letters you have after your name, the later you have to be to meetings. So if you're professor, MSc, emeritus, whatever, blah, that's 25 minutes minimum. So there's a lot of hanging around and talking to more junior people, and you chat to these people and they're working on amazing things, really fascinating. And one group in particular was looking at how we read, how we process. So that's how that started, and really just got interested in that. And went from there, and then you say, well, look, how can we apply this? And it goes there. And really, I think to me, that's the thing where every kind of good thing that I've ever been involved with starts with identifying a really interesting problem. And then that problem becomes like a stone in your shoe, and it starts to bug you. And so when we had the psychology around, well, what we should be doing, and then you go and see people producing content, and it's almost, I remember thinking, it's almost like they read the list of things you should do, and they said, we're going to do the exact opposite of that. We're going to have no interaction. We're going to have, no chunking of information, no visuals. So that really bugged me. And so I felt compelled to be like, okay, well, if this psychology is right, how would we design an experiment to prove it? And so that's where the business started, which is like, well, you'd make a format that kind of looked a bit like this, and you'd be able to show that this versus this one performs better. And then from there, what you're able to show is that you've solved a problem. And then the question becomes, okay, well, who else has that problem? Who does that problem matter to? Who in the world is held back by the fact that there's no solution? And that's really just how we got started.
At what point did you realize that you're onto something, that this is going to be something pretty big?
I don't know. I don't know. I mean, I still don't really see it that way. If you see what I mean, because for me, at least the way that I am, I'm always focused on the next thing. And if you'd have said to me, like back when we got started, the stage that we're at now, would you consider that success? I would say yes. But now success for me is getting to the next stage. And so you're always like catching up with yourself. But this gets into an interesting thing, which I don't know if you want to talk about, but is, how you frame things, and there's this really interesting idea of systems versus goals. Because human beings, you know this, right? Yeah. I'm a big subscriber to that. It's like, someone told me a quote the other day, which is like, goal-framed people exist in a permanent state of pre-success failure, which I thought was just brilliant. And it's like really encapsulates, the problem with looking at the world that way. So yeah, I don't have an answer to that question. The thing for me is like, keep doing the right things every single day, and keep putting one foot in front of the other, and you'll get to the right place in the end.
So let's talk about goals and systems then a little bit. It's a subject that I am a big fan of, because I've always been I remember I've been setting goals for myself since I was like 14 or whatever. And back then it was like, whatever, I don't know what my goal was, but something silly. But I've been doing that always. And then eventually I also learned what you were just saying. The quote that I really remember was, somebody said, goals are for losers, systems are for winners. And it's the same thing, it's just put in a more silly kind of phrasing, where systems, for me, systems are actually system is a way that gets you somewhere, that gets you towards something, right? Goals is like this aspirational thing that you may or may not achieve, but it doesn't actually help you achieve something, right? It's just, okay, now you have something that you're chasing, but how are you going to get there? Well, system is, you essentially build a system that's going to get you towards a goal. And it makes everything easier and more achievable. Yeah. Curious how you think about it, or how do you set goals for both yourself and your business? Or
it's difficult because you do have to have goals in a business, right? And we've just been through, obviously, we've just been through like planning processes and stuff like that for next year. But the thing that we always do is we'll create the plan, but then we'll see whether our systems support it. And if they don't, we need different systems. So the goal is always there. But the thing with the goal is I think you have to be somewhat flexible in precisely what that goal is. And the example that springs to mind is, and I hope I get this right, my history isn't good, Columbus, you tell me if this is wrong, didn't set out to discover America, right? He set out to discover, my history is bad.
Did he go to India?
That's something like that. I didn't want to say it.
Are we completely off here now? But I think...
Yeah. We're going to have to go and Google that. But but the fact of the matter is that, like, the end goal was different than what he thought. But because he was good at the systems, he still got somewhere interesting and somewhere good. And so that's kind of how I look at it, which is, I don't know, we know where we want to get to. But precisely what that looks like when we're there, I think that if you're too wed to a particular outcome, you lose sight of the fact that there may be other outcomes which are just as good or potentially even better. and you're blinded to that if you're too focused on an individual single goal. So a good example for us is that, we went into, the most recent cycle thinking like, we need to be signing up as many like large enterprise companies as possible. But what we found is actually our systems are really good at signing up slightly smaller companies as well. And so if we'd been inflexible on our goal, we wouldn't have exploited the opportunity that was there. And so it's all part of the same picture, which is you've got to be flexible around exactly where you're trying to get to, and just focus on having the right systems and the right processes to make movement.
Yeah, and I really think that's important. I always look at business and personal life in a very similar way, I think. And that's what I've started thinking about many years ago. I always felt like in business, we have all these frameworks, and we got OKRs, and we got Lean Startup, and we got like all this. We think about it a lot. There are a lot of, processes and methodologies, and we don't have that for personal life. And at some point, I just kind of started applying that to my personal life as well. I thought that makes a lot of sense. And it's the same with, goals and systems for your personal life. If you want to, a typical example, I don't know, you want to lose weight or you want to gain muscle or whatever it is, just setting a goal of losing 10 pounds is usually not going to be very helpful. You need a system of, I'm going to go to the gym 3 times a week, or even better, I'm going to have a personal trainer who's going to help me and who's going to keep me accountable, that actually show up those 3 times a week, right? And then you have a system, and then you're actually going to be there, and you're going to achieve that goal. And that's infinitely more powerful than just setting that one goal.
Absolutely. I mean, the goal in the absence of a how to get there is meaningless. The how to get there is the thing that really matters. And the goal will come, in your example, which is a great example of losing weight, will come if you follow the system. It may not be exactly the amount when you want it. It may be worse, it may be better. But really, that doesn't matter. The fact is that you're putting something in place to make progress.
Yeah. Cool. Okay, let's talk a little bit about where you're at now. So you guys raised some funding. You have a team across the UK and Slovenia and anywhere else.
Yeah, so we have a team in Boston, a team in the UK, and then we have a great engineering resource in Slovenia. Yeah, which is a beautiful place, by the way.
It is, I know. Thank you.
Very nice.
So the company was founded in 2014, is it?
2015 really, but 2014 I think we incorporated the thing. Yeah.
Okay, 14, 15, so about 8 years old now.
Yeah.
You raised 1 or 2 financing rounds. Is that
so? We did
accurate?
A few small kind of seed rounds, but we did our first sort of proper round last year. Yeah.
Okay, got it. So in the beginning, okay, let's talk a little bit more about the MVP, because I think that's always interesting, especially with things like software, because if you're technical, it might be very easy to build something. It's always a topic that I'm quite passionate about, because I'm a technical person as well, and as techies we love to build but not actually sell. And then if you're not technical, you get into the completely opposite problem, which is you don't know how to build something. So you have this great idea, but it's like, well, how do we do this? Because I'm going to need tens of thousands of pounds in order to just build a basic version of the MVP. So in the beginning, because you can code as well, right? Did you build the very first version?
So. I'd have to check. I haven't written anything for a long time. But yeah, I built the first version, and I think I'm still the biggest contributor on our GitHub thing. So I'm kind of quite proud of that. But there are those two sides to it. You need to be able to get the thing off the ground technically, but also kind of get it into the market. And I don't know, maybe there are some examples of people who've been able to do both single-handed. I certainly didn't. I had people around me who helped take the thing to market and work out how we sell it and all that kind of stuff. So I was very lucky in that regard, but I certainly started very much from the product end of things, which is conceptually, what does this thing need to be, and how does it get built, and what does the whole picture look like, and speaking to customers and speaking to people, prospects in the market, how well does this fit your problem, and all of that kind of stuff. But I'm better now, but certainly at the start, not commercial whatsoever. I had never sold anything to anyone. So I think one of the key things is around this was just fortuitous. I didn't deliberately think about this, but identifying the gaps of the skills that you don't have, and finding the people who you need to bridge that gap, because I would never learn to sell software or to sell anything quickly enough for that for the business to be viable if I had to go and do that, if you see what I mean.
I see what you mean. Yeah. And so how did you then get the first 1 or 2 or 3 clients? That's always there's this approach to building B2B SaaS, which I don't know if it sounds great in theory, but I don't know if that can actually ever work, which is you can pre-sell it, right? So you come up with this great idea and then you approach 100 or maybe several hundred businesses and you say, look, we're going to build this product, we're going to solve your problem, but you need to pay us in advance because we need to build it somehow, which it sounds great in theory. And that's something I was thinking about before we started recording. I was like, well, yeah, that's great if you can do that. But if you're not either a successful serial entrepreneur or an enterprise, with some track record of success, and you try to pre-sell something, but you already have big financial backing anyways, sounds pretty difficult to be a 20-something who's just gonna, walk into a big business and say, "Oh, well, I'm gonna solve all your problems. You just need to pay me first."
Yeah, I mean, I guess there's a few things with that. I know of one business who did that and ran into trouble because they couldn't deliver. Technically, it wasn't feasible in the timeframes, and I think they got into a spot of bother on that. I think they're doing okay now, but they kind of weren't able to deliver on the promise. I mean, I guess a more natural way, perhaps. So the idea of saying we'll build this SaaS product for these particular companies that we're going to go out and speak to, it feels a little bit dangerous. Like I don't know, I don't have any experience of that working, because our experience of working with large enterprises is where the infosec and legals and all this kind of stuff, and they're going to find out that you don't have the product that you're selling, and so I wonder how that works. But I have no experience of it. The more natural thing that I do know happens a lot is people moving from consulting into productizing their consulting. Mm-hmm. So I think this is a public story. I'll share it anyway. But there's a big dam provider, very, very successful. And what that grew out of is an agency who were doing an awful lot of work for different people, and they kept running into this problem, which is people couldn't centralize their assets. So it was like, it's great that you've done this piece of work for us and that piece of work, but like it's all over the place. And so what they ended up doing is building a little tool which allowed them to centralize everything that they were building for clients. And then clients said, well, hang on a minute, can I use that for everything else? And they said, well, yeah, sure you can. And then they realized, actually, we've just built a really great dam. And so we're going to go and start selling the dam to people as a SaaS product. And so I'm very conscious that is a way that people get into doing things. Yeah. And actually numerous different products and different businesses that I've worked in the past started in exactly that way. Because what you're basically doing, and I think that's a really good way to go, because what you're basically doing is you're finding a problem, you're understanding it in great detail because you're already solving it. And then all you do is you just generalize, and you just say, okay, well, what's the general problem that I'm solving here, and how do I make that generally available? And that's a very viable route. Mm-hmm.
Was that sort of your approach, or how? So I think I interrupted you a little bit. My first question was, how did you get the first sales? But then we started talking about other things.
Right. So no, that sort of wasn't our approach. Our approach was a little different in the sense that we built this thing kind of as an experiment. And then we showed it to a few people, and some of them turned around and said, that's really interesting, how much does it cost? And we were sort of, well, I don't know, we hadn't really thought about that. And so we kind of came round the other way in the sense that, we did solve the problem in a vacuum to some degree. And then, it wasn't done in that consulting way. So the first few sales to get to that point is, we basically said, well, look, there's this format for reading and all the extra bits around analytics and stuff that's valuable now. We think this is kind of good. Like who has that problem? So the proof of concept, the product was kind of built, like very early stages, but it was built. It could stand up, and so took that to various different people, and some people hated it, some people loved it, and you never really know who your best customers are going to be until you go and ask them. This is a really interesting stat that I keep telling everyone: 46% of Slack's revenue comes from 0.8% of their customers. Mm-hmm. So you do not know, and there's no way they could have pre-selected who those would be, I don't believe. Yeah. So you've got to speak to a whole bunch of people, and some people in there will say, that's rubbish, but you just need one small little section. Say, oh my goodness, the value on this is incredible. You go and you find those people. And one of the big things that I think is worth sharing is that, when we first started taking out what we thought we had that was interesting, loads of people. Like, I can't tell you the dozens of people who are like, what, why, who cares? No, that's not for me. And you go through that cycle, and you can get quite disheartened. But at the end of the day, you look back at it and you say, no, there is a problem here that people have around reading content online. We just haven't found the people where this is a real pain for them. It's like if you're trying to sell, I have to think of an analogy on my feet. Like, you're trying to sell ice to Eskimos, right? But you take that to a nice cafe in Italy, and suddenly, your ice is really valuable, and you just need to work out where your equivalent of those cafes are. But if you believe in the problem that you're solving, and it's a real problem, there are people out there. You just you just haven't met them yet.
So you had to identify. I suppose you were a little bit lucky that in the beginning, in the very early days, you did find some of those people, right? And that gave you that confidence then that, well, it is a real problem. Clearly, we have some proof that some businesses need that solution. So that gives us enough confidence to keep going.
But the thing is that didn't happen overnight. Like, that was months and months and months of going and talking to different people. Is this interesting? Right. Is this not interesting? What do you like? So that wasn't like we go into the first meeting and we make our first sale.
Right.
There's that's a hard process,
Right. Okay, that makes sense. We talked about psychology a little bit, and you said that your product from the very early days was very much based on psychological insights. And then we sort of talked about psychology related to goals as well, or at least I often looked at goal setting from the perspective of psychology, because I think that, which you would probably agree, it's very powerful if you understand your own psychology or people's psychology, right? That's kind of how we function. That's like our operating system. I'm curious if you have any other, it's maybe a bit of a broad question, but do you apply that elsewhere in your business, or do you have any other psychological frameworks? Do you think you generally approach things from psychological perspective, that you consider, how we function, and then you apply that?
I think particularly with people.
Mm-hmm.
Guy I used to work with, a very good friend, used to talk about how hundreds of years ago people used to work with their bodies, in the fields. They used to pick things up, and then stuff improved, we evolved, and people work with their hands, and manufacturing and all this kind of stuff. And now there's probably other steps in between, but now people work with their brains, with their heads. Like the currency of the world is ideas and sort of intellectual capacity and the ability to solve problems. And obviously AI is trying to eat that again, so we'll have to find something else, just as we did before. And when people are working with their heads, what's going on in their heads is really important, and their motivations become really important, and their considerations outside of work become really important. And so I think it's critical to set those things up. And so this is where you get into, is it better to just dictate to someone that they need to do something, or is it better to provide them with context and ownership? Which one gives better results? Now, I strongly believe that the latter gives better results, and I think I can point to lots of bits of evidence that allow that to happen. And that's also where, you mentioned OKRs before. I think OKRs reflect that, because the idea of those done correctly is that they flow down and you have ownership, but everyone can see the bigger picture. So there's a strong psychological element to that as well. So I think it sort of pervades everything and is part of everything. And sometimes we apply these things in a subconscious way. We don't realize we're doing it, but fundamentally what we're doing is we're accounting for psychology. So yeah, I think it's everywhere.
Of course, yeah. Do you read a lot? Is that a subject that you read? Do you read books about it? Do you just find stuff online?
I used to, when I had a little bit more time. I would love to have the time back and read those things again. But yeah, I was really into. I mean, my interest in psychology came from philosophy, because a lot of the stuff that I was interested in philosophy had a strong psychological element, which is about like the human condition and how we navigate through life and all that kind of stuff, which I find really interesting. And so that's really how I got into psychology, because it's quite straightforward to go from the philosophical side of that into like, okay, but practically what goes on in your brain. And so that's always been interesting. I mean, I do still get time to read a little bit on those things, but yeah, not as much as I would like.
Got it. Okay, so we're sort of jumping a little bit from one place to the other, but I think it's fine, because I think what I'm trying to do is kind of going through your story, but then also picking some interesting points in that story and see what we can learn from that.
Yeah.
So we talked a little bit about first clients, and then first financing. That's another point that's can be quite tricky for people, especially first-time founders. You don't know how to finance the company, how to approach investors. How did you approach that?
Well, obviously, like the whole thing, like we worked for free for quite a long time, just because we believe in it. And I've always been a consultant, really, and so I was able to do like a few days getting paid and then invest. So I was kind of quite lucky in that regard. I didn't have to kind of quit a job or anything. I just kept doing consultancy on the side. We were really lucky in the sense that we the first bit of seed money that we got, we were going in to pitch to a company. We'd been introduced to this company by a friend of a friend, and we went in, and at the end of the meeting, the two guys that we pitched to said, I'm really sorry, but we don't have the budget in the company, but actually we like the idea so much that we'd like to invest in it. And so, that's just lucky, But we did go and like try and deliberately go and get funding from a few other people before that, but it's very difficult. Because to your point, you don't know what you're doing, you don't know how to tell the story, and more importantly, at that level, the people who can potentially provide you with that money, who would take you seriously, also with the greatest respect, they're not sort of super sophisticated investors. They're kind of going by gut, and so that's very difficult, because it's not like, well, in our case, it's not like we were going to sort of like a named VC or anything. We were going to private individuals who we could get hold of. We were like, hey, you might be interested in this, but that's a difficult situation. Which
is usually how it starts, right? You start with angel investors who are typically just wealthy individuals, often investing just because they want to get involved with exciting businesses. They often don't even really expect returns because it's incredibly risky to invest at the super early stage. So they're like, yeah, well, they have the money to invest. They often find it interesting. I think it's a little bit of a status symbol as well. So there's that aspect as well. And then hopefully, if you're lucky, you get some returns. But risky game. Who knows? Yeah.
And I think that makes it very difficult. I mean, but then the other thing with that is it's risky. But I also think I'm glad that we took that route, because I think that what it meant is that when we came to do our first sort of proper financing, we were on much better ground. Because we had a proven business, we had a proven model, and so you're able to go and speak to people and say, "Well, look, like we don't need money. We want money to scale," and that's very different to being like, I've got this idea. Please give me some cash to get started. You're in a much better negotiating position. So I don't know how we do it like second time round, but I have no regrets about the route that we've taken for sure.
So when you say the proper round, was that your Series A then?
Yeah. So institutional round, yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Can you talk a little bit more about that? So that's a very different story then.
Yeah. So we no one in the company had done a Series A round or any institutional round before. But we got the business to a particular point where all the metrics were in great shape, and a lot of this stuff is about timing. And the market was in good shape, and so we're like, well, now's the time. Like, if not now, then when? Let's go and see whether we can raise an institutional round. And so we went out. We were very lucky, able to make some good connections with some good people who put us in touch with other people. And we must have spoken to about 30 or 40 different VCs. And the thing that I learned,
actually pretty good. Yeah, people talk to like 100 plus VCs before they manage to raise something.
Yeah. I think we were lucky on that, or just super skillful. No, let's go with lucky. And but the thing that I learned through
maybe it helped. Was your pitch deck done in Turtl?
Of course it was.
So I mean, maybe that's the answer.
Yeah. That could be it. Maybe that's the trick. It's easier to imagine what you're investing in. But the thing that I really realized through that process is, like, sure, part of it is the money and the strings that come attached. But the other part that I wasn't anticipating being quite so important is like the fit with the investor on the other side. And there were some VCs where we felt like, even from day one, we're going to be a number on a spreadsheet, and all you're going to care about is the number. And if the number goes up, you'll talk to us. If the number goes down, you'll lose interest. And we are one of like 100 bets that you make. And this is the model, and it's totally fine. Yeah. But the model is that like five out of the 100 come off, and everyone goes home happy, and the 95 that don't work out, well, whatever. And we kind of decided quite early on that probably wasn't the right fit with us. We wanted to have someone who really believed in what we were doing and was as passionate about it as we were. And so that kind of fit with the investor and the person that you're going to be working with on the other side became increasingly important through the process. And a large degree of the decision of which term sheet we took was based on that. Was based on, well, they're all in about the same ballpark, but these people we think we can really work with, and we understand each other.
Yeah, that's a pretty good position to be in, right? When you're, as you said, well, you often say you were lucky, but I think you also had good strategy and obviously good product. That clearly helps. With good products. It means that, well, you had customers, you had revenue, you have a proven track record, and then it's easier to raise, and then you can also be sort of selective who gives you money, right? You don't need to be desperate and just take money from anyone. Yeah. Which is, lucky, but also, I mean, incredible execution. So
we'll go with
good
lucky.
job on that.
We'll go with lucky. I'm sure we did a decent job as well. But you need a bit of sort of fortune to go your way. And again, it comes down to the thing, which is like, if we hadn't spoken to those particular VCs, maybe we would have found someone less good, and so you need a little bit of chance. Actually, the VC that we went with, we were lucky because we went into them originally, but we went into the wrong part of the business, and they said, "Oh, well, actually, this isn't for us. I don't know why you're speaking to us." And we were like, "Okay, sorry, we were just giving your number." And then they came back a few weeks later and they said, "Actually, I've been thinking about it. Let me introduce you to this other part of the business." So this is a little bit of luck there, how things work out.
Yeah. Interesting. How much is the number? It's a public number, right? How much you raised?
So we were 10 million primary.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. And that was about 2 years ago, was it? 2-3 years ago?
1 year ago. 1 year ago.
Oh, so 1 year ago. Oh,
so
okay. Wow.
14 days. Yeah.
Okay. Cool. Besides the fundraising rounds, what would you say were some of the major growth points for your business? So obviously, when you raise funding, there's suddenly a lot of capital, and you can go in higher and market and so on. Were there any other major shifts that, I don't know, maybe you found a new channel to promote, maybe it was a new partnership, I don't know, whatever it might be. You said, okay, that was like a major moment for us.
Yeah, absolutely. And the thing with that is those moments aren't optional. They're required. And you're always looking for the next one, because if you want to grow at 100% every single year, you need to find a way to double what you did yesterday, and you need to do that every single year. And chances are that what you did last year isn't going to be sufficient. In some cases,
that's actually a very good point, because to some extent, that needs to be your job, just finding those next moments rather than focusing on what's already working, because that's fine, that's going.
That's all I do now. That's all I try and do, is try and find what's the next inflection point that we can leverage to get to the next stage of growth. And so for us, we went through, in the early days, we just used to go to events. We used to pay lots of money. This is pre-COVID, when events were, a bit more viable, perhaps. Well, I think they're coming back. And we used to go and just speak to people and explain what we did, and enough of them would come back. But then that doesn't scale, because there's only so many events in the world, and they're really expensive, and you can't get to all of them. And in the end, you end up seeing the same people at the events anyway, so you're not increasing the pool of people you're speaking to. So then we hired an SDR team. SDR team did great, outbound, excellent, really ramped up the business. And then you go through all these phases, but you're always trying to see, well, this actually is going to run out. This is going to plateau in the next 6-12 months. What's going to replace it? So there's many of those things. It's almost like you have to accept that as just, that's how it is.
Mm-hmm. So Turtl right now, as I understand it, it's one product, right? One product consisting of several features, modules, I suppose.
Yeah.
Modules. Do you think at some point you're going to launch multiple products?
We don't have any plans to do that at the moment.
Yeah, okay.
I think one of the really interesting things that I've sort of observed recently is, as companies grow, how complicated they become. And sometimes I'll be in a conversation about something, and I'll be thinking, man, how did we get to a place where there was so much complexity in this thing? And I think that one of the big stumbling blocks, I think, and I'm the first time doing this, so other people may have better opinions. to my mind, one of the stumbling blocks that companies run into is just complexity. Things just get so complicated so quickly, and you almost, and I think that the addition of a completely different separate products is just, well, now you've got double the complexity, and then you've got the talking between the different things. So I'm kind of on a bit of a drive at the moment, which is like, look, simplicity. Let's try and do less things, but do them twice as well. And I believe that that's kind of the key to success. And again, like, we mentioned OKRs a couple of times. That's what OKRs are really all about. Like, what's the really important things, and how do you make the decision to focus on them and put the right resource behind them? And so, long-winded answer to the question, but as far as I'm concerned, simplicity and therefore one product is the way to go for now.
Yeah, it probably makes sense, especially. Well, I would say, so I think it really depends on your strategy, right? And I think especially for a startup, focusing on one product, I think you're completely right, because otherwise the focus, just the complexity, even just the engineering complexity, the product complexity, the complexity of your organization becomes so much more difficult to manage, that you become so much slower, that it's dangerous as a startup if you increase that too much.
But it requires a degree of, and this is interesting, it requires a degree of risk, and it requires conviction. And so one of the great stories that I read, I'm sure yourself and lots of people listening to this will be fans of Steve Jobs. And I didn't know this, but when he came back to Apple, they had like dozens of products. They had like printers, and they had scanners, and they had 5 different desktops, or probably more, and 100 different laptops. I'm making this up. And one of the first things that he did is he said, we sell one desktop, we sell one laptop, the rest is gone. And I think that's like a really interesting story around the drive towards simplicity. And he had a thing as well, which is, well, what are you doing? Why are you doing that? And supposedly he said, well, I'm waiting for the next big thing to come along. And he hooked onto sort of iPod and all these kinds of things. But he drove for simplicity, and I think that simplicity allowed him to hook on to the next big thing. Because if he was like mired down in all different like complexity of different offerings and what have you, like you can't even spot that next thing. So I think the simplicity side of things is really important. But coupled with that, I read a really great article around strategy, which really helped me understand what it really is that strategy fundamentally is about making a choice. And the way that you've made a choice is that you can be wrong. So if you're doing things and you're trying to spread and hedge your bets all over the places, you're not really doing strategy, and you're not really making choices, because fundamentally you can't really be significantly wrong, because you're doing a little bit of everything. And so it all feeds into the same thing, which is like, have a focus, have a commitment, have a conviction, and embrace the fact that that doing so means you can be wrong. And if you're in a position where you don't feel like you can be wrong, then probably you haven't done enough of that conviction and focus point.
That makes a lot of sense. Yeah. Okay. I brought up the several products question because I read about that recently, how that's one way to pursue growth, right? That's just one of the possible directions. You have one product, and then you launch another product, and then another one, or whatever it might be. And then you grow through that, because with a new product, you solve a new problem, I suppose. But I also completely agree with you. Especially for a startup, I think it's so important to focus. And then what happens very often is I see, larger companies that acquire other businesses, that grows in complexity so much. Especially if you try to keep all those acquired businesses under one umbrella, then as part of one organization, perhaps even as part of one product, the complexity becomes crazy, and you there's so much room for error, and you become incredibly slow. But I suppose, when you're a bigger organization, you can probably hopefully afford that. But when you're a smaller startup, still in a growth stage, it's harder to afford that.
I mean, just to be clear, like I'm not saying that you should never have multiple products. I'm just saying it's not the right thing for us now. I think for some businesses it's the right thing. So I know Atlassian, for example, I think it was their second product that really caught fire, and I can't remember what that is. And there's a time and a place for all of these things. It's just for us at the moment. I think we're single product. In terms of that complexity, I mean, there's a company that I won't name, but we interviewed a sales guy from a very big company who have that acquisition growth strategy, and he said it's a nightmare. He says because none of the systems talk to each other, no one knows how to make that work, everything's constantly getting in the way, and so fundamentally progress is stunted by complexity. And I think that can become a real problem and a distraction, because you spend so much time dealing with those things, you know. And I guess that goes back to the Steve Jobs thing, which is like, have a focus, have simplicity, and drive that.
Yeah, it's quite, the whole acquisition thing is something I had a few conversations about that here on the podcast. I've been thinking about it quite a bit, because it's because I've seen in the last year, especially, I've seen it going wrong several times when, for example, a business acquired my friend's business and they just had no idea how to manage it, and everything just went sideways, and I don't know if they'll be able to recover it, right? That's just one example, and there were several others. So I'm curious, what's actually the percentage of acquisitions that are, you know, if you look at a year or maybe 5 years later, what's the percentage of acquisitions that actually turn out to be successful, I suppose? I don't know what the number is. I've never seen that number, but it's just a question that popped up in my mind.
Yeah, I don't know. When I think through, I can name you many successful acquisitions. Unsuccessful acquisitions.
Oh, unsuccessful at all. Yeah, I mean...
I'm struggling to think of one. I'm sure there are some. I'm just not thinking of them. And I don't know what the percentage ratio is, but I think, as with anything, it's possible to get it wrong. But I guess it goes back to the thing I was saying before, which is, you know, at least that sort of represents a decision, because you're able to be wrong. You just want the decision to be the right one. That's all. So yeah, and again, you know, some people have spoken to us about, like, well, would you be interested in acquiring X, Y, and Z? And, you know, there's some really interesting businesses out there, and, you know, but at the end of the day, my view on it is like, well, why? You know, we could acquire a business to acquire their revenue. Well, okay, but that's not how I see things. And just the idea of having to somehow bring on board and stitch in a whole other company and culture and product and it's like, do we really want that complexity, or do we want to drive focus on what we're doing?
Yeah.
It's difficult.
Yeah, it's interesting. Well, I had a few conversations about it in the last few episodes. There was Ben Fletcher, who basically all they do is acquisitions, but it's very different. They do e-commerce, so they acquire an e-commerce brand, and it's... he might disagree, I don't know, but I think it's a bit simpler, because they acquire one brand and they just, you know, they keep the brand, they keep the product. Everything else is quite replaceable. In terms of people, in terms of software, it's all run on either Shopify or WooCommerce, so it's relatively easy to then manage that, I think.
And then, that's their strategy, right? That's their strategy.
That's their strategy. That's the whole business. They just acquire e-commerce brands, so that's all they do.
But that's their focus. But that's the thing. That's why I'm saying it's like horses for courses. So it would be bad for them if they went and followed our strategy, you know. And the worst thing to do is to do both, you know, because then you're just split between two things. So I think, again, you know, coming back to the philosophy point or the psychology point, like, be really clear on what kind of business you want to be. You know, do you want to be that kind of acquisitive sort of thing, or do you want to be sort of a distributed connector marketplace type thing, or do you want to be a software product type business? And then when you made that decision, do that thing, and don't try and be a little bit of other things as well.
Yeah. I don't remember the exact number, but Apple makes, do you know how many acquisitions Apple makes? It's insane. They like acquire almost like a business a day or something like that. Really? It's wild. But I think a lot of them are probably like small businesses, so you don't really hear about it that much. Obviously, if it's $1 billion acquisition, it's huge in the media. But I think many of them, they probably just acquired for, I don't know, if like a few $1 million, and it's not a big deal for them. But it's, I want to say, maybe like 100 acquisitions a year or something like that. It's wild. It's
to look into that. I mean, I wonder what kind of businesses those are. I mean, I know recently, because I was looking at potentially using they bought like an MDM platform that specialized in Apple. That was kind of quite interesting. I wonder, I mean, I guess when you get to the size of Apple, there are probably businesses that have aligned with you, if you see what I mean. There are businesses that grow up in the shadow of Apple, if that makes sense. And so those are quite natural acquisitions, i.e. they are naturally part of the Apple ecosystem. Do you see what I'm saying?
I understand what you mean, yeah. So I'm just looking at the Apple Wikipedia page, and it says, as of October 2022, Apple is publicly known to have acquired more than 100 companies.
Okay.
But that's in total. That's in total. Okay, so then the number, I wonder if that was Apple or was it Google? But probably, well, obviously in the recent years, they must have acquired way more than before.
Yeah.
I've heard a way larger number, because this Wikipedia page just shows like what in 2020 they maybe acquired like 15 There are 20 businesses, so that's way less than what I heard.
Yeah.
I'll have to fact check that.
My Googling skills are failing me.
Yeah. I'll have to fact check that. But I think it was Apple, maybe it was some other business. Anyways, for some businesses, that's like a day-to-day thing, basically, pretty much. Just acquisitions all the time and then merging that together. And they, hopefully become pretty good at that.
Yeah.
Anyways.
One of the ones that I always see is Accenture. Acquiring people just like for fun. But,
do they acquire other consultancies mostly?
I have no idea. I think they acquire all kinds of things.
Just all sorts of things.
I'm just looking at theirs now. They've got a fair few. But anyway, yeah.
Separate topic. A few rapid fire questions. Mm-hmm. If you're 20 years old again and you want to start a business, what do you do?
So I had to think about this, and I think go and find a problem that's interesting to you. And I think you can find that problem in many different ways, like just in day-to-day life. You can find it sort of at work, I guess a little bit as I did. You could probably go and research these things like trends and like see what's interesting and find a thing that's missing. But I'd say find a problem, but also more importantly, a problem that really interests you. Because if things go well, you're probably going to spend an awful lot of time on that problem over the coming years, as I know I have. So it better be interesting to you, because otherwise you're not going to end up enjoying what you do. So find a problem that you care about, that's interesting to you, and that you think can sustain your intellectual curiosity for a good many years to come. That's what I would do.
All right. What's the number one book or course or mentor person, something that you would say that impacted your life or business the most?
I think it's a really difficult question. I don't think there's any like single book or whatever that I'd point to. I think that the thing for me when I was thinking about this that probably was the most sort of light bulb thing from my perspective is realizing what I was good at. And realizing what I was good at was understanding people's problems. This is very relevant to what I said before. Maybe it frames that, and translating that into how technology can solve that. So I did a range of different things in my early and mid 20s, but towards the end of my 20s, I found myself increasingly in situations where there was someone with a problem, and there was a technical team able to do technical things, but no one to bridge the gap. And I worked out that I was quite good at that. And I think that from that, it gave me that feeling that actually, like, if I'm kind of quite good at that, like if I just focused on doing that, I could get even better. And then that sort of led to, conceiving various different products, and ultimately Turtl, the one that I ended up doing sort of for myself. So that was the thing for me, maybe really understanding what I was actually good at and how I could turn that into something that could, have a future and have a direction.
Mm-hmm. I think that's super interesting, because I think it's absolutely critical. If you want to be, let's say, successful, if you want to be really good in something, or perhaps just the best in the world in something, you have to figure out what that thing is. Like what is something that you're naturally extremely good at, that you're just talented at, and then you build on top of that, right? But it's tricky. I think a lot of people don't know how to figure that out, or it's just not obvious to them, because sometimes something that you're good at, it just comes so naturally to you that you feel like everyone should be good at that.
Yeah, but I think that I think what you're good at and what you like doing are often two very connected things. So again, going back to psychology, there's this idea that if something is intrinsically motivating to you, i.e. you do it and it makes you feel good in some way, then you're going to perform better at that activity, you're going to spend longer doing it, and so on and so forth. So for me, I always loved computers when I was a kid, but I loved particular aspects of them, like not purely for sort of data number crunching things, but for the fact that they could solve interesting problems and do things and cause things to turn out differently. And so because that was something I was interested in, and because that was something I enjoyed, that I think fed into the fact that I was good at solving those product problems, because it was motivated by a deeper sort of interest and curiosity that I had around it. And so I think a lot of the time, a good place to start with that is like again, it goes back to what actually motivates you, what's actually interesting to you. Because, again, you don't want to end up in a place where you've identified that you've got this talent for something that you hate doing. You'd be like a brilliant piano player, let's say, because you have like amazing manual dexterity and the ability to, sight read. But you might hate playing the piano, and like, do you really want to go down that path? Like, start with something that you love doing, work out how to get really, really good at it, and then work out how that like has a direction. I mean, I'm sort of giving life advice here, which is I'm absolutely not qualified to do, but I think that's the route that I've taken, which is, I always loved, as I say, computers, tinkering around, and it just kind of went from there.
Yeah. Cool. And then final question. So in your opinion, what do you think separates okay founders from great founders?
That's very difficult. Because I don't know enough of them, and I don't know which ones are great and which ones are good. So it's hard. But I think there's probably some qualities, a lot of what covers on what we said before. So when I was thinking about this, I think having that clear vision and conviction. We spoke about before. How hard it is in the early days. You're knocking on doors and people are not answering or chuck you out or whatever. You have to have the conviction in the thing that you're doing and the vision for where it gets to in the end, because otherwise you're not going to get there, and also you're not going to know where there is, at least in the broad neighborhood. And I think the second most important thing once you have that is an ability to bring people with you, because you're not going to be able to do any of this stuff on your own. And I kind of said that at the start, where I've never sold anything to anyone, and it had just been me, then we would never have got even our first customer. So you need the ability to invite other people in and get them to share that vision with you, and to well, first of all, have a vision that can be shared and related to, but also be open to the fact that means that other people would also need to have some control over that vision and some ownership. So the ability to sort of not be overly dogmatic and to hear other voices, I think, is really important. And then we touched on as well, like, working out what you're good at, and then in contrast, the other talents and skills that you're going to need to be successful, which you aren't good at. Because I was listening to a podcast, this is a few years ago, where the guy was talking about, he realized that, he'd need to do finance and stuff, but he'd never done that. So he trained himself to do it. He said, that was the stupidest thing I ever did. I just needed a finance person. So I should have gone and found that person, like hire in to fill the gaps. So I think that's another important element, which is being able to understand and appreciate where it is that you're lacking, and who you need to bring in to make it that's not going to be a weakness. So something in those areas. I think if you tick all those boxes, and probably many more, besides, you build up a picture of actually this has a chance of getting to somewhere good. Yeah,
I agree. I can only agree with all of those, and also, as you said, and probably many more. Is there anything else you think we should talk about?
No, it's been really interesting. I think particularly the thing that I wasn't expecting that was really interesting was the relation of psychology to a lot of different bits of this. I really think that and it's sort of the driving force behind the business is that fundamentally, if you don't understand that and take that into account, life is hard. I think that if you do, then life gets a little bit easier. Still hard, but a little bit easier, and you can get to better places quicker.
Yeah, I agree. Perfect. Very good. Well, Nick, thank you so much for coming on. I really enjoyed the conversation. I think this was that the first B2B SaaS founder that I had on the podcast? Possibly. Nice. So something Excellent. New, something a little bit different. Absolutely. So thanks a lot for coming on.
No, thank you. It's been great. Really interesting conversation with Tits, and best of luck. Really enjoyed it.
Likewise. Thank you.
All right. Thank you.
Thanks for listening until the end. I hope you enjoyed it. If you like the content, please do me a favor and click the like button on YouTube, or give us 5 stars on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, wherever it is that you listen to your podcasts. Leave a comment, subscribe if you want to hear more from us. That really helps also to get the podcast out there, and that helps me get more interesting guests and create even more interesting content. So I really appreciate if you do that. If you have any other comments, questions, feel free to message me. You can find me on Twitter. That's usually the best channel. The link should be somewhere in the description. And check out my Twitter. I try to tweet interesting stuff about similar content that we talk about on the podcast, key insights from the podcast as well, and just generally stuff that I learn and stuff that I do. So see you. Thanks.